Okay, in this video, I'm going to just have our office discussion as I usually do on philosophy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just work my way through some pages and think that I've had you read. I think up to this point, you should have read up to the beginning of page 69, all of page 68. So I'm going to start on page 49 and try to just cover some of these pages and talk to you um, about the thoughts I'm having as I look through these pages. I've already read them and I've thought about them, and so this video is going to have that process as its organizing theme, if there ever is an organizing theme to these things that I do. So you might want to follow along. I'll read some passages, um, but again, it's going to be pretty much a free-form discussion as thoughts come to my mind. The first thing, I do have a little cheat sheet here, but it's not much. The first thing I want to point out though is that you need to be careful with uh, books. This is obviously the case, right? Typos will slip in, and um, it's very hard to stop all typos. Very hard. So on page 46, you have Blackburn talking about the universe being excuse me 13 million years old, and then two pages later, I believe, the real age is 13 billion with a B. He fixes that soon enough. I don't remember exactly when he fixes it, but when I read 13 million, I knew that was wrong right away. So there are some issues like that. The other thing is, for example, if you go to page 51, Blackbird again is a very good writer here, but it's difficult to write about these topics in a lucid and engaging way. Blackburn does a great job with this, so we're going to allow him a lot. But just there are some things where a little bit more preciseness would have been possible without losing any sort of his the tone and the engaging qualities of his work. For example, on the top of page 51, the first sentence reads, "Feels the pain," and then he said, "Descartes actually located the place where the a magical event takes place." He didn't, right? He thought he did. So I would have preferred the sentence to read, "Descartes actually tried to locate or thought he had located the place where the magical events take place." And I'm taking issue with that because a beginner of philosophy that reads this might actually think, "Whoa, there's actually a place." Blackburn seems to be agreeing with Descartes that there's a place where this stuff happens. No, Descartes thought he had figured it out, but later on, it was no one believes it. He thought it was the pineal gland. It's a gland, I believe, somewhere around. Hmm. Is that at the stem of the brain or somewhere around there? But his idea behind this was, look, you have symmetry all over. You have two lungs. You have two legs. Two all sorts of two things running around. And two eyes, all that, two lobes of the brain. So in order for them to connect, and you also have you have two elements here, mind and body. You need a center function. You need that third one, and the third doesn't need to be in divisions of two. It could just be one. And as you look through, now Descartes used to do his own anatomy, so one wonders. Okay, so he noticed we have two kidneys. He noticed we have two lungs. Why did he not also notice we have one stomach and one liver? So, these things, they don't go very far as ideas go. But he thought it was in the pineal gland because it was located, I think it's located between the two lobes of the brain. And there was some reason. The fact that it's one gland amidst multiple duality, I mean, pairs of glands and organs, and that it was located in the center of the body, I think convinced Descartes that this is where the mind connects with the body, right? No one buys into that anymore. It may as well be the liver. And I think the ancients and the classical writers did ascribe a lot to the liver, right, as the seat of emotions. So the bowels. Anyway, let's move on. All right, let's move on. This thing about being a little more precise carries out through some places too, especially with Blackburn's use of priori and a priori and posteriori. The phrases are a priori and a posteriori, and the a needs to come in front of it. Now, most philosophical books are going to signal this in their layout by italicizing the phrase, and they have some sort of precedent or rule to follow too. If they an older version of an English handbook will say, italicize foreign phrases or words that have not been commonly accepted into the language, like patio. No one's going to italicize patio or things like that. But a priori is often italicized, and when you see the phrase itself a priori italicized, you realize it's going together, right? But a couple times, at least once in today's reading, Blackburn mentions just the word priori, which is a little sloppy. It's a priori. I think he talks about math as being a priori or priori discipline. And another time, the lack of italics might actually, if you turn to page 64, for example, and if you look right underneath the blocked italicized quotations, it reads this way: it is this kind of a priori certainty, right? But if you're not reading carefully and you don't realize that the a there is part of the phrase a priori, you might read it this way: it is this kind of a priori certainty. And so in that case, priori is standing on its own as an adjective. And if you go back to page 59, okay, and you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the seventh line from the bottom of page 59, it reads like this: and intelligible connection, which we find in the priori discipline of mathematics. So Blackburn has a history. He has used priori alone as an adjective. So this thing over here, without italicizing the a, and we use the phrase this kind of a problem, this kind of a problem, this kind of a solution, this kind of a situation. That actually needs to, I would say, as an editor, that needs to be fixed. All right. So anyway, I guess it's time to move on, right? Get past this. What I'm trying to tell you here is you got to kind of read slowly, and watch out for that sort of thing. Excuse me. So, Leibniz and Locke. All right. Now, one thing I want you to walk away with is this notion of Locke's of a superadded, superaddition, superannuity. No, superannuity wouldn't be the right word, but the superaddition, and it's a really good word, and it really hits the idea well, in that Locke was willing to say that God sets up the physical laws and he creates matter, and then he steps back and he lets the physical world develop on its own from those starting points. But as it develops, he superadds consciousness and mental experience to certain elements in the physical world. So Locke would definitely say he is one of those elements because he's having thoughts. Now, what Locke couldn't do is explain exactly in physical terms where those thoughts are coming from. So he brought God back into the picture as a mechanism, and it wasn't at all a hard thing for Locke to do. Remember, the notion of God was an accepted notion for much of mankind's history. Now, in many sectors today, many parts of mankind today, it is still an accepted notion, even a self-evident notion. But modern time, or I should say postmodern times, well, coming from the modernism and postmodernism, has made it much more easy for someone to irrationally dismiss the notion of God. All right, so, but nevertheless, Locke is able to pull in this concept to save the appearances. All right, and he added this notion of God like miraculously creating consciousness at the same time that hammer hits, that person's toe. God creates the mental event of pain. All right. So now I'm just going to throw something in here that wasn't covered in the reading. There's a little bit of a problem with that, because that means that God is waiting to see if this person X is going to hit the hammer or not, hit the toe with the hammer or not. And as soon as God finds out that, he's going to create the mental event. In other words, okay, sure, Locke, let's just give you this idea of superaddition. Does it happen in moments of time? So is God constantly watching all physical events? And for those select physical entities, we call them persons, and to a lesser extent animals, does he also superadd mental experiences as the physical event happens? So then you have God sort of working in time, waiting to see the physical event to decide what superaddition to create for it. Or you can say, well, God knew all this beforehand, and he created, because God has foreknowledge. And so once he created matter the way he did in the stardust, the interstellar nebulae, and then he created physical laws, especially the physical law of gravity, of attraction, and then he granted the universe existence in, countless years, billions of years. The universe has had all the time it wanted to, according to these sorts of thinkers. Then, God knew how it was all going to play out, because he could see the future, right? So he set it going, and as soon as he set it going, he also simultaneously knew its end. So because he had all of this foreknowledge, he created all the super additions at the same time that he created the physical additions. And they come into being at the very same moment, on their own, though, on their own. So it's as if, when God created the physical world, he created the elements, the atoms, and the forces, and he just said go. Okay, so that just started. At that point, the idea goes, Locke's idea, God kind of moved back, or the deist would say God no longer intervenes with these laws. But they have produced what they produce. They have produced, just look around. And how old do you want to say this is? 13 billion years old? Okay, in 13 billion years, look around. This is what they have. And then at the very same time, though, it's as if God created a film strip, or another whole collection of things that were in order, and then he just let that go, and that set of things, cognitive events, mental experiences, has also been unrolling parallel with the unrolling of the physical universe. And in exact places, the cognitive event you experience as joy when you're happy about something, let's say you right off to be accepted at some institution, that's all a physical event. The very interactions of atoms 10 million years ago have culminated on that day you wrote the letter in interactions of atoms that had caused your hand to pick up the pencil and write the letter. You see how this thoroughly undermines any sort of notion of human planning or desire or cognition, right? That physical event just happened. Now, as your hand, as it was destined to do so, because of the physical forces set in place, and because of the atom's position in the creation of time, and the way they started bouncing and interacting and attracting and repelling each other, that physical event of your massive matter, which you call your hand, picking up another mass and moving it such that graphite traces of mineral were left, if you wrote it in pencil, were left on a paper, that was all a physical event. Okay. Now, because God also created the film can of mental cognition and let it just, and like tapped it and let it unroll, your super added experience, gives meaning to that physical event, and you actually think you're applying to college or whatever somewhere, and you get the letter back, which is a pure result of atoms colliding in the universe being everything that exists. you get the letter back, and because of the ways the atoms were destined to collide because of physical forces, whoever was on the other end moving around the physical stuff and grabbing the pen because he was destined to grab the pen, or hitting the send button or the accept button, and then shuffle back your letter to you, you and it says you got accepted. That's what the atoms are doing when they bounce off the paper and hit your head and all that. So you're reading the thing, and then you go, I got accepted, yay, and you're all happy. Well, that's the super edition God had destined for that exact moment of time. 315, November 15th, 2013, whatever. Boom. It matches up. Now that's called the doctrine of pre-established harmony, and there were some very strong adherents to that. Does any of this have anything to do with common sense? Where has common sense gone in all of this? Okay, what I'm trying to tell you is that philosophical analysis is willing to shelve common sense to try to see what is really going on. Okay, and what you do is you have to sense the inherent contradictions. Mind cannot interact with body. So what is really going on? And you probe it, and you try, and the answers that you come up with may be far from common sense. But if those steps you take from that beginning situation, we say this I know this cannot be the case. By definition, if matter is that which is not mind, okay, then mind and matter, or mind and that which is not mind, cannot interact. Okay, there's no point of contact. So what is this? Yeah, and then you start down the path, and the path may take you to strange places that do not accord very easily at all with common sense. All right, so what are you going to do about that? Now that's the conundrum of the philosophical life, and it may involve a balance of activity. It may involve a decision to well, I don't know. I mean, you'll have to think about that yourself. I'll give you a suggestion when we get to it. But anyway, Locke's notion of superadded is a genius one, and unfortunately, it doesn't evade the problem, right? Because Blackburn is introducing Locke in the context of Blackbird's notion of zombie and mutants, and the notion of a mutant is that. Okay, so this person has mental events, but how do you know that person's mental event does not, when that thing you see slamming the toe with the hammer, and she's going, ow, 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 but how do you know that deep inside that's not the physical way this person is responding to, like, hearing a beautiful opera? He might actually be thinking that might be joy. I mean, how do you know that when that person hits his toe, he doesn't actually get joy? And the way he expresses joy physically is, ow, ah, ah, ah. How do you know? That's the question. That's the question behind the whole mutant thing. Okay, and so Locke is Blackburn essentially asks Locke, right? Well, how do you know then, if you're going to say God superadds stuff? How do you know that the very same thing he superadds for you, when you slam your toe with the hammer, or your thumb with the hammer, is the very same thing God superadds for person X when that person slams the toe with the hammer? The super additions may be different. You still can't see the super additions, right? So it's as if Locke is saying, whenever I slam my hand with this hammer, God gives me a book, and I open up the book and it's a lot of pain. Ow, ow, oh, but here's the book that God gives me. And whenever you slam your toe or your thumb with a hammer, God gives you a book. It's the book of the super addition cognitive experience, the super added cognitive experience. And I can see that book being given to you, and you open it up, but see, how would I ever know what's in your book? I'm not you. I can never read that book. So I might be able to say, well, God gives books of cognitive experience to everyone, but that still doesn't tell me what's in your book. See, so Locke still doesn't answer the essential question. And it's as simple as that. For all of Locke's intellectual finesse, you have to admit this whole notion of superaddition. If packets of cognitive experience are superadded to individuals' experiences, how do I know my packet that I get when I stub my toe? You know, I've always been trying to say hit my hand with a hammer, but if you realize how I've been messing all this up, it always ends up with my toe, right? Because for the last week and a half, I've been breaking my little toes on stuff around here. So anyway, how do I know that the packet I get of super edited information when I stub my toe is the very same packet you're getting? See, Locke only thought he established that packets are given, but he doesn't tell you how you can figure out what the packets are. Now Leibniz is a little more sophisticated. He actually is. And he, as Locke points out, he was more of a mathematician. I mean, as Blackburn points out, he was more of a mathematician than Locke. He was contemporary with Newton, and in fact, both he and Newton discovered calculus at the same time in different places without collaboration. And I think one of the most celebrated cases of copyright litigation ensued. It wasn't as crass as that. They were arguing about who got the credit for the invention, not necessarily the royalties of that. But anyway, Leibniz has another idea. He says, look, you know, take a circle and put it on a glass, okay, and just hold it up like this. Now have some light come shining from around. All right, you can see that it's a circle, right? That circle is defined a certain way. It has a center point, and all points on the line that surround the center point are equidistant from each other. um, and the line has a number of infinite points. Okay, if you run with that definition, you have to have a circle. So you got the circle, but shine the light through the glass, and there's a red circle painted on the glass, and let that light like fall upon the table underneath it. Now move the glass a little bit here, and what is still a circle in the glass, the circle never changes. All of a sudden becomes a parabola or an ellipse in its shadow, in the shading that's the result of the light passing through the glass. And you know, Leibniz is saying, look, that's kind of what this is like. Okay, you have the physical entity, the circle, and you have time and situation and other forces that interact with that, and they project onto another underlying substrata of matter, the brain, a certain projection. And so what we experience the interaction of a certain force, i.e. like a light beam on the circle, we experience it in the brain locale, and we experience it as a parabola or as an ellipse. So there is some connection. If we can only understand the way that the transformation takes place, we could always predict it. And then if we could ascertain that the brain strata or the matter is the same for all people, and that the physical thing, the circle and the glass, is the same for all people, and we understand how the projection is created according to, you know, laws of projection, then we got it. Everyone has to experience the same pain, because it's just, I mean, just think about that. Okay, let's say you had 100 glasses with red circles drawn in them, and there's an empty hole in it, sort of like a red donut or something, like a red ring, right? Now you all hold those glasses up the same angle, and they're green tables underneath them, and let's get 100 of them. They're all exactly the same angle. Now let's shoot light at the same angle at these things. So, you know, you're holding it like this, and the light's coming in this way. Well, for all of those green tables, the projection is going to be the same. See, it's going to be like maybe a parabola leaning to the right, or maybe just a very large curved line going to the left. It depends on the angles, right, and everything. But you understand that rationally, logically, we would have to say then all the projected parabolae are going to be the same. So Leibniz was sort of running off that idea that, you know, we could do that, but, you know, he never really proved it. For the very fact that, you know, what's the problem with that notion? Well, we can all understand that it holds if we're able to see the 10 tables at the same time, right? But we're never able to see 10 individual minds at the same time. So, you know, what if something screwy is going on? So I don't think that Leibniz actually ever does get away from the evil demon, which is one reason no one has ever considered him to have had the answer to the question. All right, I need to try to get a little bit back on track here. Oh yeah, but one thing Leibniz was able to suggest, and I'll come back to this later because this is very important, is he was able to I'll come back to it later in the class, but he was able to suggest that with this notion, okay, that the present state of being is the most nearly perfect state, or is the perfect state of being. So what is the best that could have been. And this is the notion of the best possible world of all possible worlds, the best world of all possible worlds. And it's coming from Leibniz, and it was strenuously attacked by Voltaire. And I'm going to let you read some of his Candide and some of his. There's a short story that just really takes that to task. Because the notion with the best of all possible worlds is how in the world do you explain away the central question that Voltaire asks, and that's the earthquake that shook Lisbon, I think, in the 17th century or 18th century. We'll read about that. Anyway, I would like to get back to the text here. Let me see. Okay. All right. All right, now there's a very important line here on page 63 at the bottom of the, well, it's the fourth line from the bottom, the fifth line from the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and read that second to last paragraph. It reads like this, all right? In the philosophy of mind, the Leibnizian must deny the possibility of zombies and mutants, okay? If the physical biography is fixed, then the mental biography is fixed thereby. There is no independent variation, actual or possible. The philosophical problem with this is that of understanding why it is so. See, that's what I was trying to get at. It is a question, and Blackburn is suggesting it hasn't been answered by Leibniz. It is a question of how to understand the way in which the entire physical story makes true the mental story. Okay, now if you look at what we've read so far, that is really how this problem has been approached. How does the physical situation allow for the mental story, the mental situation? Now I would suggest that if you flip that around, you might get more answers as to this mind-body problem. Okay, and the way that I would approach this is, how does the mental situation make possible the physical arena? So see, the trouble with all of what we've been reading so far is that they have assumed that the mental has existed first, or if not first, at least coeval with the mental. The physical, right? Did I say the physical? The physical existed first, has been assumed, or that it is at least coeval, or equiponent. Okay, coeval, well, evil, but that's not EVAL, but that's not the right. You look at the Latin root, and we're talking about the same time, or equiponent, equipotens, as powerful as. So what we're saying here is either the physical is that which came first, and the mental is dependent on it, or the physical and the mental are co-independent. But what if you were to tinker around with the notion that the mental came first, and the physical is dependent on the mental? I think some of these questions may disappear. Now, let's see. I'm at page 66 here. Yeah, I know what I wanted to talk to you about quickly. I'll read the second paragraph on page 56, okay? It says, let us take pain as an example of a mental state. Suppose now we try to analyze what it is for someone to be in pain. Excuse me, I'm on page 66. This is the second paragraph. Let us take pain as an example of a mental state. Suppose now we try to analyze what it is for someone to be in pain. We identify pain primarily in terms of what pain makes us do, which is also, open parentheses, which is also what it is for, comma, in evolutionary terms, closing parentheses, period. Pain makes us do a variety of other things, etc., etc. Now, it goes on, but the one thing I do want to point out here is that you're going to run across this quite a bit, and it's minds that approach philosophical problems on various levels through a evolutionary presuppositional mindset. In other words, they've already bought into the notion of evolution, so they can explain then um, things in terms of the evolutionary process. Now, nowadays, evolution is actually becoming a troubled concept, very much so philosophically, empirically, scientifically. It's and thankfully, rightfully so. It's a just in its own right. It's a well, uh, but here, see, the question is, well, given the fact that we had to evolve, as Darwin said, this is the thinking of someone who's going this way, or that we have evolved, as Darwin said, and that those things connected to our physicality that do not serve a purpose eventually get weeded out if they're keeping us from something. If they are just piggyback riding, we often can tolerate it, but as soon as they become a danger to our existence, we tend to weed it out by dying out with it. In other words, a group of 1,000 organisms, drastically simplified, right? But here, let's just, and then all of a sudden, an appendage that never was really a disadvantage to them, all of a sudden becomes a disadvantage for some reason. Because they are now at a disadvantage, the notion of survival of the fittest is going to allow those that don't have that appendage to gain the upper hand in maybe reproduction or food allocation in survival. And so eventually those that don't get rid of that appendage somehow, they will die off because they're always at a disadvantage because of that appendage. So, evolution will use this notion, evolutionary thinkers will use this, evolutionists, to explain so many things. And, but it is, upon analysis, very much open to question. And so here, Blackburn is saying, we sort of understand pain as this way. It has evolved as an evolutionary tool to alert us that something is wrong. And we want to get rid of that thing. So we are going to it's a warning system. It's the smoke alarm. And it's so disagreeable to us that it forces us to pay attention and to act. And so we'll take care of that infection. We'll take care of that broken leg. We'll take care of that whatever. And so pain has a great evolutionary function. But, Blackburn, what I appreciate about Blackburn is that he's willing to come around and say, but I just don't really know. I mean, because what about mind? And if you read these pages, you understand he's questioning the value of mind given an evolutionary function. What about mind? Because if you are going to ascribe to mind an epiphenomenal activity, and you need to know that term, you read it, epiphenomenal. If it just is sort of like the burp on the sea of matter, and not serving any real function, why did we ever evolve mind? In fact, mind has brought about this notion of what we call consciousness. Not conscience, the conscience, the sense of morality, which seems to be very much in contradiction to evolutionary principles. So that I think that is truly a troubling notion for anyone who is an evolutionist. Also, Bertrand Russell's notion of it makes a lot more sense that a young Earth that looks old, that this Earth in fact just appeared 10,000 years ago, and because of entropy, because of the law of entropy. If entropy, it makes no sense that life would come into being from chaos, right? Designed from chaos. It makes much more sense that we started off with design and then are devolving into where we are going. And Russell will admit that. And that's, I think, a very strong point. But see, Russell is not a Christian. What Russell is saying is that you can't explain where matter comes from anyway. So even if you say, well, we all came from the sea, or whatnot, well, where did the sea come from? Well, it came from stardust, and the hydrogen and the oxygens that were in stars dust actually collided as the clouds of gases passed each other and formed water. If you want to hear more about that idea, you should listen to the audiobook called The Big Thirst Forget the author's name, but anyway, and then that's where all the water came from. And then but Russell could say, well, where did the stardust come from? I mean, come on. The point is, whatever you say is the principal first matter, the matter, you are matter, the matter. Well, where did that come from? So Russell is being willing to admit to the fact that we cannot explain where matter comes from. We have to assume that it always has been. Okay, so why not? If we're stumped by that mystery, how can we not? How can we not? If we can't explain the creation of the first form of matter, how can we deny that out of hand that it was impossible that the first form of matter was incredibly designed, and that we are actually working through the processes of entropy? So yeah, Russell has a good point there. I really like that. The thing about, okay, now I'm going to throw something else at you, because you got to be tricky with, you got to be a little this sort of thing is a little tricky. There's a new drug out there called crocodile. So you spell it with a K, Kroki, something like that, crocodile. And it's incredibly addictive. All right, it's like 10 times more addictive than heroin. You can Google this and find out about. I have the article. Maybe I'll let you see it. Crocodile. The thing about crocodiles, you get addicted to it, and then but then it starts killing you, because you know what? It kills you. It kills you from the inside out. It atrophies your cells. So people are dying because they are chasing the high, and they take crocodile, and their legs are, it's a burning sort of thing. I don't really know all the medical details of it, but the fact of the matter is, if you take crocodile and you become addicted to it, you're gonna die. But that hasn't deterred over 20,000 people in some foreign country, I forget which one it is, of taking crocodile. So, you know, if we're all after survival, right, and that sort of thing, isn't crocodile like antithetical to evolution? But see, the evolutionists will come by and say, well, really, who is being eliminated by crocodile? The people we want to get rid of, you know, so that our own genes and our own species can become stronger. So actually, crocodile is an evolutionary mechanism to cut down on our population, so we have more food and more space and whatnot. So there, you know, there are many ways where evolutionary, because of the presuppositions of it, can make sense of some strange activity. But I really don't think you can make sense of the mind, the quote unquote evolution of the mind, unless you're willing to say something like this: wetware, which is our body, and the earth is destined for destruction. If our genes are that cognizant of the fact that the wetware in which they house their own existence, and the idea now behind evolution, it's all about the genes trying to self themselves, and not the individual. So this is where the notion of selfish genes comes from, by Richard Dawkins. And the genes have recognized that the wetware is bad stuff. So in order to somehow invent a way to get beyond the wetware, genes have invented mind, so that mind can figure out technology. And it gets a little spooky there, but you know, I guess someone might say that. Okay, I know I'm going a little over here. I think the reading I gave you this week is not you know, a lot, so I'm going to give myself 2 more minutes. I'm trying not to turn this into a habit. Okay. I mean, I really need to keep these at 30 minutes, but because of the shorter reading, I'll let this one go to 40. The last thing I want to talk to you about is this incredible notion of pain. Pain is a weird thing, okay? But you're going to run across these things. Well, and what I mean by this is these strange things that are defined in a very peculiar way. And here's what I mean. Think of how you would define pain. Okay? Now let me ask you this question. Can you have a pain and not feel it? And it seems to me that the answer is obviously no. That part of the definition of pain is that you feel it, right? So for someone to say, well, I know I have a pain down there, but I'm just not sensing it right now, to me is very sloppy use of language. And it's fact, you can't really say it that way. Because pain, you have to feel it. All right? So What that means is that there's an element, there's a category of things that really find their existence as things in human experience, in the psychology of the experience. So for pain to be pain, number one, you have to feel it, and number two, it has to be very, very unpalatable to you, very disagreeable. Okay, you have to feel it, and it has to be very disagreeable. And now, as far as the level of disagreeableness, you can have certain levels of vividness and occasion and shades of complexity. So maybe the pain that you get from from mental depression is different from the pain that you get from cutting your finger with a knife. But it's something you feel and something that you are very much you want to get rid of. You don't, by definition, you don't like it. You don't you don't you strive to get rid of it. Okay, so if you run with that, with the notion of pain, um, you you cannot say then that a zombie who feels pain is feeling something different from how you feel pain. Okay, because pain is pain. But that doesn't present any sort of answer to Blackburn's conundrum of the zombie. But I guess what I'm trying to do as a teacher of philosophy for you in this term is to just to give you a heads up and about these things, these entities, that they have to be defined a very peculiar way, and it's actually a strong tool. Their definition, um, and the, pain being one of them. Pain, you have to sense it, and it has to be disagreeable to you for it to be pain. Um, because as soon oh, I feel the pain, and I like it, then we'll say, you know what, it's pleasure, isn't it? It's some sort of strange, macabre sense of pleasure, perverted pleasure. So pain is an intriguing thing because it allows me to have another tool that I can use when I try to think about the way things are defined. All right, dent is another thing like this, and he brought this up to you. He talks about the dent, and the one thing about the dent is that it can't exist without a physical thing upon which it is manifested. A dent, by definition, exists only alongside a physical object. So, probing the definitions of the terms you use when you engage in philosophical analysis may be a profitable task because they'll give you certain very clear markers or alignments beyond which you shouldn't go or you can't go. So we probably should spend more time in discussing how we define terms and the very process of definition in philosophy. Thank you for your attention and for letting me go 13 minutes over. I appreciate it. I won't do that again.